So negative externalities of production causes market failure. Now, this one's a much more on the specific side that they want a discussion on the whole concept of externalities. Lekin, I feel that they have specified the question that it is from the production side. So it is from the point of view that when you produce a good or service, there is some sort of pollution that you end up creating. So because of that pollution, um, the marginal social cost tends to go up as a result of that, right? तो उस सिनेरियो के अंदर what is likely to happen, especially अगर आप indirect taxes लगाते हैं, but we know last time, so let me just bring this information back. The answer, learn how to answer your question in terms of assessment objectives because the examiner is checking on the basis of these assessment objectives. First, 14 marks के लिए you have AO1 and AO2, assessment objective 1, assessment objective 2, which is about knowledge and understanding and the analysis. So if the question is, like for in this case, with the help of a diagram, assess the extent to which introduction of indirect taxes is likely to address the problem of market failure. So your analysis is about that how imposing indirect tax will solve that problem. The question is very specific. Okay. So how will it do? So that is going to take you to level three. Lekin before that, there is all sorts of explanation that you have to do before moving into the main thing. You have three levels in which your answer should be. Level one is basic definitions, correct definitions, but not really answering the question because you haven't talked about indirect taxes, the application. You haven't spoken about the whole market failure that is happening. You've just very briefly explained some of the terminologies. That's it. So level one के लिए we have from 1 to 2 5 marks. Level two we have about 6 to 10 key range, and then level three is your perfect that you've answered everything. If too brief, you get 11, but if nicely elaborated, you can get up to 14. And then for 6 marks is your assessment objective three, which is about evaluation, or evaluation के अंदर you have level one and level two, in which you're going to be talking about um, that how indirect taxes are going to fail, right? How much minutes do you have? So you have about 40 minutes to answer this question. For 38 to 40 minutes, given के आपने question को पढ़ा and then you decided कि which question you want to go for. 40 minutes is not much time for a 20 marker. So what kids end up doing is they spend a lot of time for these 14 marks and they hardly spend time for this 6 marks. Now, if you do a percentage, 6 out of 20 is a reasonable percentage. Matlab, if I do the calculation, 16 out of 20, that's almost 30% of the mark. Are the kids spending uh, 30 minutes of their time? Sorry, 40 minutes ka jo time hai. So basically evaluation, if you do like pure math, you should be spending somewhere near uh, 12 minutes for assessment objective, that is evaluation. Now, I know that kids go through like a traumatic experience in as to how to write evaluation, but the good thing is that A2 ki evaluation is much more simpler. All you have to talk about is the counter argument that indirect taxes will not solve the problem. And so, what other policy might be able to do? Assessment objective के अंदर in this question the problem is that they have only spoken about कि indirect taxes किस तरीके से इस problem का solution है. The good thing in the previous essay was, which we dealt with, in which they mentioned that talk about two policies. So at least there was more room for you to get marks. यहाँ पर you have to be more uh, descriptive about how indirect taxes will work. So let's jump into the question. First thing is standard, like the previous question that we did, or other market structure questions, a market failure question that we're going to do, that the first thing you have to talk to us about is what is market failure. We want a reasonable idea that you understand what market failure is about. So when we talk about market failure, the first thing, Joe, we said before also, it is when pre-market fails to allocate resources for the social welfare quantity. Markets कहाँ produce करती है? Market produces, I'll be a bit on the briefer side today. So market produces where average revenue is equals to the marginal cost. This is where allocative efficiency occurs. If we were to do graphically, the graph that we basically make to show that, we have a market failure. तो हमने last time भी कहा था कुछ something like कि it produces, market produces where AR equals to MC, or where marginal social benefit is equals to marginal social cost. So if we are doing our regular demand and supply wala diagram, so what happens is ये हमारा demand curve है, ये supply curve है, or this is the quantity where the market produces. Now, demand and supply की situation क्या होती है? At this point of intersection, is that people's willingness and ability to buy a product and producers' willingness and ability to sell the product intersect. So this is where the market produces. In market structure, so those of you who haven't done market structures, you will have to stick with the idea for now that we said the supply curve is the marginal cost curve and the demand curve is the average revenue curve, which is equals to price. This is something that we deal in chapter number 4. So for now, let's just work with this. So ये जो मैंने ऊपर market failure की एक एक allocative efficiency की जो एक condition बताई है, that market produces where AR equals to MC. So MC and AR basically means that the market is producing where demand is equals to supply. And we've learned this in O levels and AS that wherever the demand and the supply curve meets, that's the best place the markets can produce because there's no shortage, there's no surplus. Whatever the consumers want is available in exactly the precise quantity, and the producer is getting their money worth, right? Um, लेकिन जब हम market failure के केस में आते हैं तो we say that maybe the market underproduces or overproduces, and so that takes you away from the equilibrium through underproduction and overproduction, and so market is failing. I personally prefer this particular one in this case because उन्होंने question में जब externality की बात की है ना, तो externality के केस के अंदर हमें पता है we're talking in terms of the merit and the demerit goods, or we're talking in terms of that spillover effect on the third party, the externality. When we have the externality ka situation, then I would prefer that we should make this diagram right here, which is about markets should produce where marginal social benefit is equals to marginal social cost, and this is where the social welfare quantity is. But what we learned in the case of demerit goods was that markets tend to produce more of these harmful goods. And in case of in case of merit goods, the market underproduces them. ये merit का case था. And this one was the demerit ka case. So in either situation, the markets are failing in terms of the production that is happening, which is this one, which the government feels should be produced. Up once we've sort of like just given an idea कि market failure के अंदर allocative efficiency is where P is equals to MC. By the way, I just introduced another term right here. P equals to MC is allocative efficiency, which is again happening exactly at this particular point. So in all these scenarios, what we're saying is the market is not producing where it should be. Ab, one of the confusions that I personally feel with these questions, and the conclusion I have come to is that whenever we're talking about externalities, and specifically if they have mentioned negative externality, that means I don't need to talk about positive externalities. I don't need to talk about it. I only need to talk about the negative externalities that are there. So first thing is we need to define what is negative externalities. Now, normally when we talk about negative externality, we say negative externality occurs when um, there is a harmful effect that takes place on the society. So when we have negative externality, we're talking about negative, they like the word spillover effect. So, negative spillover effect on the society, especially people who are completely unrelated to the transaction. What transaction? The transaction that happens between the first and the second party. Like oil, people pay for it and buy themselves oil and then they do whatever with it. And the oil companies, they basically get the revenue for producing the oil. They make money, but the the people on the shore or near the refineries, they have all this pollution that they have to deal with, or the spillover effect in terms of the oil spills in the ocean, and then their fishing gets affected and whatnot. Those are those people in the society, the third party, who are getting the harmful effect of it. Okay. What they want us when we are explaining negative externality is that maybe you can explain in terms of negative externality from the consumption side or negative externality from the production side. So, in one of the lectures, I have spoken about that whenever you think about externalities, there is a way to think about it. Whenever we talk about externality, is it from the consumption side? Is it from the production side? Because what we're saying is if you consume a good and it creates a negative effect on the third party, like demerit goods have, then we're talking about the negative externality, we're talking about the demerit goods, right? But if we're talking about from the production side, that when you produce a good or service, because of that, you create water, air, noise pollution, then it's sort of like harming the society in terms of pollution and congestion. So that is from the production side. This is like we're talking about pollution from the production side. Its question, Kinder, they have been very specific that you want to talk about negative externalities in production. But in your essay, if you define negative externality from consumption side, they will accept it. Okay, because you're only defining what is negative externality. But my opinion is please stick to the question and go for this one, this explanation, and not this one. You want to be safe? Do both. कोई मसला ही नहीं है. Um, so negative externality from the consumption side would be that you will explain that when consumer consumes demerit goods, because of that, the society is harmed. So you have a negative externality from the consumption point of view. But if we are talking about negative externality in production, then we're talking about that whenever a good is produced in factories and in the production process, there are pollution that is created, which sort of has an effect on the society as a whole. So that is your negative externality in production. So I'll go with the negative externality in the production side. So my definition could be something like this when I go this way. So I would say that negative externality occurs when the production of a good produces a cost to society which is greater than that incurred by an individual producer. So the oil manufacturer is looking at the cost that in order to extract oil from the ocean, I need an oil rig, I need labor, I need all sorts of capital, all sorts of raw material, and I'm going to drill the oil and it's going to cost me, let's say, $20 per barrel. Okay. And I'm going to produce millions of barrels and it's going to cost me $20 per barrel. I'll sell it for $60 a barrel and I'll make myself $40 ka paisa. But the negative externality is saying that the society is bearing a much greater cost than what an individual producer is looking at. Because when you factor in those marine people and the people who go to the beach and now can't go to the beach because of the closure and the oil spill, now if you factor that in, that external cost, then the society is bearing a much greater cost. And therefore, our formula that marginal social cost, the cost to the society, is marginal private cost your oil producers are taking into consideration, plus the marginal external cost, all those unrelated people, the spillover effect that people are facing, right? So ये हमारा formula and clearly this formula is telling that when on actual price or on actual cost, when you add the externality, it increases your social cost. So therefore, your final statement, this is sometimes described as a negative spillover effect. I've said we like this word. Examiner gets very happy when they see this word. Good impression. Okay. If we want, we can do a diagram for this one. So let's choose. So we have a knowledge base of 4 diagrams in our heads. Um, I can't go over each of them, but I'll go directly to the one that we're talking about because we're doing externality in production. So let me show the market failure so that through my explanation of the diagram, I will make sure that everything is covered and examiner has absolute clarity that I understand this question and the topic. So we said markets produces where marginal private benefit and marginal private cost intersects right over here at QM. This is where the market produces. However, this good that we're talking about, not from the consumption point of view, but from the production point of view, is creating a negative effect on the society. So मैं consumption वाली side को neutral करता हूँ by saying that the social benefit is equals to the private benefit. Therefore, this is neither a merit good nor a demerit good. It's from the consumption point, no discussion. It's actually because the question is on the production side, and all my explanation so far of the negative externality has been how the marginal social cost is greater than the private cost, right? So on that note, what we have is that market is producing at QM based on the private benefit and private cost, but government feels that based on the social cost and the social benefit, this is how much this good should be produced. And therefore, the market is experiencing a market failure. वो failure कैसे हम recognize करेंगे? QM पे देखेंगे that social benefit or social cost में क्या gap है. This is your social benefit and this is your social cost. So if we somehow able to reduce the quantity and reach QSW, problem sorted. This right here, the shaded area, represents the market failure. And we've done this in our explanation in the previous questions. So this is something that you will have to explain, obviously, using the diagram and how the markets are failing. Now that we have understood that this good has negative externality in production and it is harmful, so we need to go into the question to get the maximum level 2 marks and eventually go for level 3 is we need to prove that indirect taxes can help solve our problem. So the first thing we must do is define what is an indirect tax. So we're going to rely on our O level and AS level knowledge that indirect taxes are imposed on goods and services. It raises the cost of production for the producers. As a result, the supply curve falls, price rises, quantity demanded goes down, problem solved. This is how indirect taxes works. If you want, you can do the basic demand supply ka diagram, but again, I'm not so for it. I will choose the same diagram of the cost benefit analysis, and I'm going to make another version of it, which you've already done, Upar. So you have the cost and you have the benefit. We know the marginal private benefit and the marginal private cost. And since it is neither a merit nor a demerit goods, and we're not talking about the consumption, so let's say the social benefit is equals to social cost. And this is where the market is producing. Now, in our previous diagram, what we showed was that the social cost is actually up there. But in a free market, this social cost curve diagram does not exist. This is government's personal assessment of where the society's cost is. A free market producer never looks at the social cost. Okay? So what the government has to do is somehow penalize the producer जो private costs को देखता है and somehow make this private cost go up here equals to their social cost. This is an imaginary situation. All right? This is an imaginary situation which government says ये होना चाहिए था. But this is not what market is producing based on. Okay? So although we know कि क्या होना चाहिए था, how it should be, because remember, when we talk about merit and demerit, in AS we said merit goods should be provided by the government or demerit should be restricted by the government because markets will never take that information into account. Because for the market, this does not exist. This only happens in a mixed economy where the government comes in and makes an assessment that there is something called a social cost. Okay? And so, based on that, this is where the market should be producing. Now that the government has this knowledge, what they're going to do is they realize that the social cost is social welfare quantity is here. It's on the left hand side. These goods, which are creating negative externality, should be produced lesser. So, what can we do? So, this is what we can do. जब हम indirect tax लगाते हैं, तो all of a sudden, for the producers, the social cost is not an imaginary thing, it becomes real. Because what happens is when they take that cost into consideration, their supply curve actually goes up. Their marginal private cost curve actually goes up because now it has tax in it. Now they are producing lesser, and the social welfare quantity that we wanted is a reality. Okay. So, therefore, and now if you don't write this paragraph, there is a very, very big problem. The question was, let me go back to the question for a second. The question is, assess the extent to which the introduction of indirect tax is likely to address this cause of market failure. Which cause? The one that we just spoke about, all of this externality in production. So this जो उन्होंने बात की है, this market failure, not just any other imaginary situations that you can create based on what you have, thought the question was about, but what it is about, ये यहाँ पे externality in production की side से. And so your final statement must hai, that when indirect tax is imposed, the marginal private cost curve shifts upwards to MPC plus tax. And as a result, the government, through indirect taxes, reduces the quantity consumed by raising the price, right? By raising the price comparatively, by raising the price, they have reduced the quantity, and therefore, जो market failure था of all of this, by reducing the quantity, they have eliminated the market failure, or they have addressed the problem of overproduction by producing less. ये जो connecting point होता है ना, it's a must. You have absolutely no idea right now, but you will see as you're going to go along with me and the essays, you're going to see मैं बार बार अपने हर explanation को connect करता हूँ to the question that see I'm answering the question. The question was that the market is failing. I am even मैंने जब indirect taxes की बात की, I have explained that this is how it is going to address the problem. So that sort of like brings the whole thing together. Now, if you don't write this line, which I just did, your answer just does not qualify for a level 3 answer. Okay? You will get the maximum of level 2, which is 10, but in order to go to level 3, you must say, okay, see, indirect taxes just solved our problem, and now it is sorted. The whole market failure has been corrected through indirect taxes. This diagram is an essential one for us. That in some places they even say this, okay, this actually became equals to the marginal social cost. So if you want to say that, sure, you can go do that. But that's our explanation. I hope you're following so far what is going on.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. There is not much I can think of as far as analysis goes. So now what we want to do is we want to move towards evaluation. Evaluation is just our discussion about how the markets will, uh, indirect taxes will fail in addressing the problem of market failure. So a few points of evaluation. Like I said, you should spend at least 10 minutes on evaluation. The reason why the threshold is higher in A2 one of the reasons is because you can actually get reasonable marks in evaluation for a reasonable explanation. Number one, explanation. You know how we're saying that the market is failing by this much. ये जो gap है, ये negative externality in production को represent कर रहा है. That the point where market is producing, the private benefit and the private cost is here, but the social cost is up there. Now, how did I make this social cost की line? Why didn't I make it a little lower? Why didn't I make it a little higher? What is the basis of me making it over here? So I said the basis is that I counted all those external costs that has happened because of this oil production. So what kind of externalities are we talking about? So we said we're talking about all the spillover effect on the wildlife that we are destroying and ocean life and all. And the fishermen that live over there for their livelihoods, their lives are destroyed now. They can't fish. Beaches are closed. People can't go to the beaches. And so maybe beaches were one of their weekend places where they go to de-stress. Okay. Uh, What else? Well, because tourism is not coming in that area anymore, so all the shops and all near that place, they're not doing business, and that's affecting their lives. Now, how can a government quantify every single thing that I'm talking about? Because most of the things that I've talked about is nearly impossible to quantify. So the counter that I'm trying to make over here, how indirect taxes can actually fail, is the amount of tax that I have to place to shift this supply curve to MPC plus tax is relying on this MEC key value. Now, if I don't know how to measure that effect on the people, the external cost, because external cost is a very subjective idea, so how am I supposed to put the right tax? Okay. So if I had to say, I would write something like this: a government might introduce indirect tax to reduce consumption and lower quantity to achieve allocative efficiency, but it is difficult to determine the value of tax that needs to be imposed because it is dependent on the negative externality and such is very subjective to calculate. So it is near impossible. So therefore, it's not going to help us solve the problem. So one more line that should be there is, क्योंकि अब जब मैंने बात की है value of tax की, तो I would add to this and I would say, if too much tax, if you end up imposing too much tax, so that would lead to quantity demand falling by too much, and that can create unemployment in the sector and all. So that's a problem. Otherwise, if it's too little, you know, then quantity demand will not fall by so much. And, they'll continue. They'll continue to exploit. So it's not going to solve the problem. So मैंने दोनों तरफ से इसको बात कर दी. That's a reasonably good 2 marks you should get for this explanation if you're able to do. But if even if you do it really briefly and you just say okay, the value of tax is difficult for the government to calculate, and so they will not be able to impose it correctly and might not be able to achieve. देखो, again, connect to the question. And so they might not be able to achieve the allocative efficiency that they desire, right? So एक बात ये हो सकती है. Other things that you can talk about is very like generic sort of ones, like these tax may take time to become effective. What do I mean by this? ऑयल कंपनीज के ऊपर मुझे टैक्स लगाना है. आई हैव टू टेक दिस टू द पार्लियामेंट. आई हैव टू हैव अ डिस्कशन ऑफ इट, इकोनॉमिक डिस्कशन, एंड गो थ्रू द ब्यूरोक्रेसी एंड लॉबीज, and then impose it. Once I impose it, अब एक ऑयल कंपनी के ऊपर अगर मैं टैक्स लगाता हूं तो दे कैन नॉट मेक चेंजेस द वेरी नेक्स्ट डे. इट इज गोइंग टू टेक सम टाइम फॉर देम to implement the result of it. So it might not have that immediate effect in terms of the production, right? So ये भी एक problem हो सकती है from the bureaucratic situation. One of the things that I would recommend you to talk about indirect taxes is again from the AS level that indirect taxes are regressive in nature. What does that mean, regressive? Regressive means that it harms the poor or it burdens the poor more than the rich. So rich will continue to consume these oil-based products, but it's actually the lower income people who will have to bear the burden of these taxes. For example, अगर पाकिस्तान में आप बात करें, तो if 1 liter of petrol is for 268 rupees or 260 something, I think 274 is high octane. Almost near 100 rupees is government taxes, near 100 rupees, I think close to 90 rupees plus minus 5 is government tax on it. So obviously that 100 rupiah is falling more, the burden is on the poor as compared to the rich in terms of the incomes, right? So that's one thing that can be talked about. Indirect taxes, अगर आप लगा रहे हैं, तो there can be, because the problem is from the production side that you are producing in a not so environmental friendly way. One of the policy, when you're looking at the lectures and notes and all, one of the policy I would like you to focus on is that the much more direct approach or a policy can actually be, which is called like pollution permits. I really need you to look closely to those pollution permits. Pollution permits are basically those tradable pieces of paper which allows you to do a certain amount of pollution. You go to the government, you pay a price, you get yourself these pollution permits. तो इसको क्या हो गया एक तरीके से पोल्यूशन को लास्ट लेक्चर में भी आई सेड अ वर्ड लाइक इट हेल्प्स इंटरनलाइज द कॉस्ट. तो जो पहले आप धुआं आसमान में उड़ा रहे थे एंड पानी में टॉक्सिक डंप फेंक रहे थे which you were externalizing, you were sending it on the people. Now, by paying in advance to the government a tax amount and getting yourselves these tradable pollution permits and then producing based on them. So that sort of like taxes them in a way, but it is much more direct because you can choose the producers you're targeting because remember, indirect taxes आपने लगाए हैं on oil-based products, right? Now, the thing is कि जब आपने oil based products के ऊपर लगाया है तो everybody who's using oil has to pay a price. It's not separating those who are polluting more and those who are using uh, better management techniques to lessen the pollution because everyone has to pay tax on oil. Pollution permits के साथ क्या हो जाता है कि you are targeting the companies and you are making them think, okay, should we pay these prices or should we fix ourselves? And many will decide to fix their pollution ke emissions and reduce those emissions. And that's gonna sort of like solve our problem here. तो ये आपकी एक alternative policy हो सकती है, which they like, is the pollution permits, and it sort of like nudges the people. Yeah, question.
Sir, can you please explain pollution permit again?
Yeah. So I'll go over pollution permits one more time. So pollution permits is, uh, let's imagine India, I think a few years ago. So some of my relatives in Ahmedabad, basically, they have factories and stuff. And what all factories do is they dump the pollution or the toxics and the dirty water and the smoke up into the air in the rivers and so on, not caring about who it harms. It's not their problem. And so, since they don't have to deal with those toxics, they don't have to factor the cost in. If they had to deal with those costs, they would have to find a way to deal with that cost. So government in India decided one fine day, I'm sure that they must be giving them uh, not, notifications beforehand that we're about to do this, but probably people never cared about this. But then what they did was one fine day they decide every factory in that vicinity shuts down and they cannot continue operations until they install certain gadgets. If they install those gadgets, which is going to be costly, but those plants or gadgets are going to measure the pollution that they're making, and they are measuring, or sorry, or they are cleaning, those plants are cleaning the pollution that before dumping the water into the river, you have to clean that and then dump it. So एक तरीके से क्या हुआ, now these businesses have to incur certain costs. इसको मैंने कहा कि आपने internalize कर लिया है costs को to the producers. Pollution permits is one of those ways. Pollution permits is a piece of paper or basically a ticket for you to be able to pollute in the country. इसके लिए obviously the companies need to first know कि हम जो ये smoke release कर रहे हैं और जो हम ये water टॉक्सिक वाटर हम जो कलेक्ट कर रहे हैं बिफोर डंपिंग, वी नीड टू फाइंड आउट कि ये कितना पोल्यूशन है पर क्यूबिक वाटर और पर क्यूबिक एयर. So the government's people can come and they can collect the chimney में से जो आप smoke निकालते हैं, and they can collect a sample. They can send it to the lab. The lab will basically tell कि per mg सॉरी पर क्यूबिक फीट के अंदर आप कितने mg सल्फर डाइऑक्साइड और इसको पोल्यूट कर रहे हैं एनवायरनमेंट को. ओके. सो अगर आपकी फैक्ट्री 8 घंटे चलती है तो टोटल पोल्यूशंस कितनी हो जाएंगी. सो यू गो टू द गवर्नमेंट एंड यू buy these permits, you pay a price, whatever the government has set, and you buy these permits from the government. Now, that permit is basically a license for you to pollute the environment, but you're paying a price. So, therefore, you have factored in the cost. What will happen? Your marginal private cost curve is going to jump up because you're paying a price for these pollution permits. Now, businesses के point of view से pollution permits, एक तो cost of production बढ़ गई तो supply falls down, demand goes down, uh, problem solved, allocative efficiency is achieved. On the other side, the businesses might even think that, okay, so instead, why don't we install those plants? It's going to nudge them. Okay, instead of buying pollution permits, why don't we solve the problem of this pollution? And let's have plants which so that we're not creating toxins. So we don't need to buy that. इससे environment clean हो गया. Because remember, at the end of the day, in this whole situation, the government's aim is we want lesser pollution in the environment. That's the goal. Now you can do that through taxing. You can do that through uh, legislations, okay, or by nudging the producers to go for alternatives. Now, what I was explaining about pollution permits, one more thing is, जब मैं indirect tax लगाता हूँ on oil goods, every factory that produce oil goods does not necessarily have to be creating pollution. हो सकता है that some of them are using, um, those methods like solar energy, so they're not burning oil, so they are less polluting. ठीक है? So indirect tax अगर मैं लगा देता हूँ on all oil-based products, let's suppose I say all the car companies have to pay 15% indirect taxes on the petrol cars that they're using because they're going to eventually use oil and they're going to pollute. Fine. Lekin what about the cars which are using the Euro some regulations and their systems are much more efficient and their engines are not polluting? अब उनकी गाड़ियों के ऊपर भी तो 15% टैक्स लग गया, which is actually discouraging car producers to become efficient or make efficient engines which are not polluting. So they say instead, why don't you do pollution permits that only, those factories which are creating pollution should pay a price, and those factories which are not do not need to buy these pollution permits because they are already creating cleaner air. Uh, अब इस तरह से you would notice that one of the solutions of this could be that you create awareness and education in the your population that pre-loved goods and services are good. Thrift stores are good. You don't need to look down upon people who are buying these secondhand. In fact, let's somehow create a prestige in doing that. So what you do is you promote in Hollywood and all these places where the rich class is consuming these goods because at the end of the day, uh, it's a status thing that if you're buying pre-loved things and if you're buying recycled things and if you're driving an EV which does not create pollution, it is more of a social thing than uh, than an individual's idea of carbon footprint. And I'll tell you why. That research has been done on it, and the research showed that if you make a recycled bag and you don't advertise on that recycled bag, you don't put stamp on it that this is, 100% recycled material, it will not sell as much. But if you put that stamp on it, and in both cases, consumer is well aware that ये 100% recyclable को use कर रहा है. But if you don't put a stamp, people will buy less of it because it does not give them the bragging right. Because they want to show off that the bag that I'm using is recyclable material. So see how uh, carbon friendly I am, and I'm part of this solution. So, I want to buy something like this. So this can be an alternative also that you want to increase the demand for those goods and services which reduces pollution in a way. रिसाइक्लेबल्स के अंदर वेस्ट के अंदर तो लॉज आ गए हैं लेजिस्लेशंस आ गई हैं जिसके अंदर यू हैव टू यूज 30% 50% रिसाइकल्ड मटेरियल्स स्पेशली प्लास्टिक वाले केस के अंदर इवन इन डेनिम एंड जीन्स एंड ऑल वाली साइड के ऊपर ऑल्सो तो पाकिस्तानी टेक्सटाइल प्रोड्यूसर्स नाउ हैव टू फिगर आउट कि यूरोप में अगर हमें सेल करना है तो वेरी सून वी नीड टू फिगर आउट कि किसी तरीके से वी आर प्रोड्यूसिंग दोज जीन्स विच हैव रिसाइकल्ड मटेरियल इन इट. Pakistan, mein, I don't know if you know, but my friends tell me that in order to find recycled material, it's more difficult in comparison to finding uh, brand new raw material. For example, if I want to produce a plastic bag, it's cheaper to get brand new um, रेजिन्स प्लास्टिक रेजिन्स लेकिन रिसाइकल्ड रेजिन ज्यादा मुश्किल है ढूंढना बिकॉज वी डोंट हैव दो सेटअप्स वी डोंट हैव द होल रिसाइक्लेबल्स का वेस्ट के अंदर क्या होता है कि प्लास्टिक बॉटल्स गोज हियर पेपर कप्स गोज हियर ड्राई थिंग गोज हियर वेट थिंग गोज हियर तो उससे क्या हो गया है कि उन्होंने अपना पूरा सप्लाई चेन को सॉर्ट आउट कर लिया है but we don't have that. Our dump is all Sat, and then you have unfortunately the Afghani kids and So people, your low income people going into the dump yards and sorting. And then once you sort, there's very limited quantities that you have. So it's actually more costly for us to produce recycled material than creating a whole brand new range. Right? I'm following so far because I sort of like diverted also from your question. So all of this needs to be talked about. So this is like one of the alternative questions on this, which in which they tell you a policy and they tell you a specific type of externality they want a discussion on. And so then your answer needs to be very specific to that information. All right.
Okay, sir.
All right.